All right, so we're going to look at chapter 28 now. This is the Uncivil Wars, Liberal Crisis, and the Conservative Rebirth. This is a fun image from this time period, kind of representing Vietnam, clearly illustrating the idea that lots of people just wanted out of the different conflicts that were going on. We were a little beaten, bruised, and battered as a country. All right, so let's look back at JFK. So JFK, foreign policy wise, remember when he gets into office, he's got a couple of big issues. He's going to have the Bay of Pigs, right, which is trying to overthrow Fidel Castro. That is a huge snafu. Does not make Kennedy look good. Then we're going to have the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is going to be somewhat redeeming for Kennedy. He's going to negotiate. There's going to be some back and forth, eventually leading to the Russians removing the missiles from Cuba, and in return, we remove missiles from Turkey. So let's now look at kind of his domestic policy. So everybody looked at Kennedy as youthful. He was inspirational to this new generation. He had the idea of the new frontier, right? We're going to still increase defense spending. We're going to increase minimum wage and employment. We're going to establish the Peace Corps, which is kind of the idea of spreading democracy, but by showing that we're helpful, we're good people, and look at us giving you assistance and building roads and schools and helping other nations out rather than sending in military. And then he's going to create NASA. All of this is, of course, cut short from his assassination November 22nd, 1963. All right, so this is going to take us into the 1964 election, which is going to be Lyndon Johnson against Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater is really going to campaign against the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that Johnson got passed. He is what's known as an arch conservative. He is anti-communist and anti-governmental. So he doesn't like the size of the government and the government getting involved in a lot of things. He's going to promise a more vigorous Cold War foreign policy. This is really going to come out, unfortunately, in a debate where he kind of makes the use of the nuclear weapon as like a viable option in any combat situation, which a lot of Americans are going to kind of be turned off by. He is going to be the author of the Conscience of a Conservative, which is a major inspiration to Ronald Reagan. So anybody who deems themselves a conservative hopefully has read this and has it in their repertoire. All right. Johnson, on the other hand, he's going to win this election really because the country is still holding on to JFK and JFK's potential legacy. So that's going to be kind of what carries Johnson over the finish line, which is going to help him with his Great Society initiatives. He's going to push forward funding for education, funding for healthcare. He's going to increase teacher trainings. He's going to propose Medicare and Medicaid, so still around today. And he's going to have something called a war on poverty. The idea is that he's going to try to create programs that are going to help people get out of the poverty level. And this does actually work because the poverty line drops from 20% to 13% of Americans living below the poverty line. This is the election results. Johnson pretty much claimed house. Again, a lot of people voting for him because they're holding on to their love for Kennedy. Here's the poverty rate. So as you can see, during his time in office, we're going to have right up here, 1964, his war on poverty is actually going to do some good, and we're going to stay at that level. We are going to hit some inflation and stagflation here during the Carter administration, which is going to increase. All right, and then in the 80s, with the tax cuts that Reagan puts through, we're actually going to have a spike in the poverty rate exceeding the poverty level, and then we're going to come down again. And then we're going to have an increase one more time over here in 93, 94. Okay, so let's look at the rebirth of the women's movement. Okay, we like to say that the women's movement and the feminists came out in the 60s. They only did to a small degree. The 1970s is really the feminist movement. So this consists of working women joining unions. They're going to fight for workplace equality. And by 1970, 40% of women work outside of the home, only to, of course, go home and do what society says is their responsibility: cleaning house, making dinner, grocery shopping, taking care of the kids, doing the laundry, ironing, all of that stuff. Um, Betty Friedan is going to help organize the National Organization for Women, also known as NOW, still an organization around today. She's going to publish the feminist Mystique, 1963, where she asks, is this all for women? Right? College educated, has all of this potential, and spends their day running errands, taking kids back and forth, cleaning the house, making dinner. And her question is this all? This is, of course, targeted to college educated women. So kind of keep that in mind. We are going to get the idea of sex being added to Civil Rights Act of 1964, which says that they can't discriminate against male or female genders. All right. So then we're going to move now. All right. And we're going to go back to Johnson and we're going to look at Vietnam. Okay. So the Gulf of Tonkin really is a situation where we have our naval ships over there. We're assisting, quote unquote, the South Korean government. And this is basically giving the president the power to authorize military action in Vietnam, bypassing congressional approval. This is kind of a big deal. So North Vietnamese boats, and I say boats because they are not ships. We have ships, right? Naval ships. North Vietnamese have boats. North Vietnamese boats attack the USS Maddox, and Johnson is able to pull out this Gulf of Tonkin resolution and tell the troops to attack back. So the deployment of troops, this means that our Marines are going to be the first to land, all right, and then we're, after that, going to initiate a bombing mission called Operation Rolling Thunder, which, remember that we, a country not living in a jungle, are not used to fighting in a jungle. We're now over in Vietnam, where it is a jungle. So one of the best ways and strategies that our military thinks we can do this is by bombing from the air. So just arbitrarily bombing areas, because we don't really have the experience in fighting in a jungle. So we're going to use our airplanes more than anything else. If you pay attention to the red here, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, this is a significant form of transportation for the North Koreans. But if you look, it does actually flow into Cambodia more than Vietnam. Okay, so that was pretty smart of Ho Chi Minh. So it's going to pit off at these different areas. All right, but the main trail, all right, a lot of it being underground, is actually going to be out in Cambodia. This is going to be pretty central and important when we get to Nixon. Okay, so remember that we have the authorization and we've declared war over here in Vietnam. All right, to bomb Cambodia would be outside of our powers, but Nixon's going to do it anyway. All right, so here is our personnel in southern Vietnam. Notice that during Kennedy's period, we're sitting here at this low number. By the time we have Johnson, we are going to spike. All right, and then by the time here in 1968, we get Nixon in office, okay, we're going to eventually have this slow downturn until 1973 when we do have the peace accords and we leave. Okay, something to keep in mind is that television, right? Television was really central to the civil rights movement, right? And it's really pivotal to Vietnam. People literally sat around and just watched the war on television. During 65 and 66, people supported this Vietnam War. People supported LBJ. Even though, right, the coverage is showing the dead and wounded, we still stood behind our president and what was going on. What we're going to eventually get, though, is this credibility gap whereby journalists begin actually questioning the official version of what's coming back. Okay, so they're over there witnessing one thing and televising it, but yet the government is putting out different information, right? Like, we're winning and we're totally getting making headway here, whereas the shots that are being delivered and put back on TV is showing that we are having significant death rates and we're wounded, and there's a lot of not images of us not looking like we're actually winning. So this is going to fuel the anti-war movement. All right, the anti-war movement is going to consist of a couple of different groups. All right, and we're going to have a pro-war movement, and a bunch of it is going to center around the young. So we're going to have the New Left, which is a bunch of college students, right? Students for a democratic society is what they're called. They're going to reject consumer culture. Okay, they are going to fight for the disparity between poor and rich and try to narrow that. And their foreign policy, they're also going to fight that of containment, right? Because containment is what's taking us into these wars. Okay, so they reject consuming things. They fight the difference between poor and rich, and they're anti-containment. Then we're going to get the Young Americans for Freedom, and this is going to be a conservative group countering the New Left. Okay, they're going to assert that it's their God-given free will, all right, and that they can have more power. All right, they are definitely for the federal government not having so much power, and they're pro-Vietnam. Okay, so they believe in God, they're conservative, they're all about free will. All right, they want the government to shrink, and they are pro-Vietnam. And then you have the counterculture. So you got to keep these people separate, right? The New Left, they're very political. The Young Americans, again, very political. And then the counterculture, which we all love to recognize as the hippies. Okay, though they become the symbolism of the counterculture, they really lack direction in a lot of ways. Okay, the quote unquote hippie is really, right, the music, the dropout kind of culture. They're not necessarily always the political activists like the New Left. Okay, then we're going to have 1968, my favorite year in history, only because so many things happen, arguably like the saddest year in history. So first we're going to have the Tet Offensive, which in January of 1968, starting it off big, the Viet Cong launch an offensive in South Vietnam. Okay, the Viet Cong are the North Vietnamese communists. All right, we're going to have a ceasefire because it is a holiday in Vietnam. The Viet Cong are going to disregard this, and they are going to attack, which leads to heavy losses for the Viet Cong. But, all right, psychologically, it really hurts us because the media coverage shows intense fighting, showing that we're not winning, that the Viet Cong can surprise attack us. So we're going to have a shift in support. Then we're going to get a bunch of assassinations. All right, sadly, we're going to lose Martin Luther King on April 4th in Memphis, and then we're going to lose Bobby Kennedy on June 4th in LA. All right, these are images from 1968 from the Tet Offensive. If you look at General Lon, the director of the South Vietnamese National Police Force, he is going to execute a suspected Viet Cong prisoner, or spy, sorry, in the streets of Saigon. This photo really turns the tide because this general basically created himself as the lawyer, the judge, right, and the executioner. The idea that he just executed this guy in the streets. We're supposedly fighting for democracy. This does not represent democracy. The minute these images get published in the paper, a lot of people are going to turn against the war. Okay. This is just an image of Bobby Kennedy because I love him. He's trying to carry on the Kennedy name. He was a reluctant candidate. People didn't give him much hope, but he actually started winning in the primaries before his assassination. All right, so let's look at the culmination of 1968 protests and division. So at the Democratic National Convention, right, the party, it's super divided. There's disruptions. A bunch of the New Left do say that they're going to protest the convention. This is going to lead to a riot between the people there to protest and the police. You can look into this more and read it. You can take your own sides. Either the police attacked the rioters attacked the police, or the protesters attacked the police. But either way, it resulted in violence. All right, this is going to divide the Democratic Convention. It's going to help Richard Nixon kind of move in and gain more voters. So he's going to bet a bunch of blue-collar voters. So they're going to turn Republican because of kind of the chaos image of the Democratic Convention. Okay. So these strong union guys who are usually strong Democratic voters are going to leave and go for Nixon. He's also going to seek to kind of quell fears of communism and the counterculture by being very anti-communism and anti-counterculture. So more conservative minds are going to support Richard Nixon. And then you're going to get George Wallace. He's the governor of Alabama. He is going to be a third-party candidate. All right, his most famous speech in front of the Capitol is where he says, "In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny. And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever." So he is definitely going to be the Dixiecrat candidate. The idea that those people who hold on to the Confederate Southern Civil War idea of race and superiority and inferiority, they are going to stand behind George Wallace. He is going to have an assassination attempt, which is actually going to take him out of campaigning for a while, but he's going to lose. All right. And Nixon is actually going to win this one. So a lot of this is because of his strategy. He really seeks to attract Southerners by promising, you know what, the courts keep doing this whole like desegregate things, but I'm not going to enforce any of it once I get into the White House. Okay. So those people who were supporting Wallace and were torn between what to do start to lean towards Nixon because they're like, hey, if you're not going to make us desegregate things, then all right, I'll vote for you. Okay. And the idea is that those people who disliked desegregation were the quiet voice of the majority of Americans that felt forgotten. Okay. So they are the silent majority, is what they're called. Nixon also coins kind of the law and order idea to campaigning. So he's going to bring law and order back, which kind of feeds into our criminal justice system. And that's a whole different lecture. All right. So when you look at it, Nixon won. I mean, not much of a competition there. Okay. So remember that, okay, on the home front, we still have a bunch of these other movements going on. Okay. So we have the Chicanos who are protesting against the war. Okay. Because the draft is pulling the Mexican Americans, the draft is pulling African Americans, all right, and the draft is pulling poor whites, all right, the middle class and the upper class are not being drafted as much. Okay, so Mexican Americans are going to be protesting this, all right. Black Power, the Black Panthers are also going to be protesting the war because of the draft. And then Muhammad Ali, the heavyweight champ, okay, he's going to resist the draft because he did get drafted. We, the country, then say, or the government takes away his heavyweight title. He gains it back later, but he does lose his heavyweight title because he refuses to go to the draft. So let's look at, again, women's liberation and the feminist movements. All right. These are college-educated feminists. We now officially see the terms sexism and male chauvinism commonly used in our vocabulary. The key goals of the women's liberation is really childcare, equal pay, and abortion rights. Okay. And they are mostly white-led movements. So again, we have some separation of races there. We're going to have some sexual politics, which basically what I mean by that is campaigning for reproductive rights and awareness of sexual assaults. To go to the police and claim that you were sexually assaulted didn't happen so much because the police didn't do much about it. So they're going to really push for this to be taken seriously. And then we're also going to get Title IX from this big campaign, which allows the girls to actually get sports. Okay, so that's really a big deal. So women's participation in collegiate sports increases 840% between 1971, when Title IX is issued, right, and 2003. So any of you ladies who want to play college sports, Title IX, it's how it and why it happened for you. Okay, then we're going to have Stonewall. So remember that we have the American Indian movement. We have the Mexican American movement. We have civil rights. Okay, all of these things happening. Now we're going to get Stonewall and the gay liberation. Okay. They're inspired by Black Power. They're inspired by the women's liberation movement. They're inspired by the civil rights movement. Okay, so on the summer evening in 1969, when the Greenwich Stonewall Inn was raided and the cops were not interested in receiving their bribe that night, they wanted to arrest people instead, there was a protest. Okay, This protest was led by transgender and drag queens. Okay, gay and lesbians then joined in. It was 2 days of rioting. Okay, and the gay liberation movement is really going to be fueled at this point and really push forward. All right, so then let's go back to Nixon in Vietnam. So Nixon in Vietnam, he's going to have the policy of Vietnamization, right? Peace with honor, bringing a decrease to American troops. U.S. casualties are going to fall. Troops are going to be removed. Okay, but then we're going to invade Cambodia. Okay, which is going to lead to some protests because people are like, wait, what? You're going to pull us out of Vietnam and put us in Cambodia? One of these protests is Kent State, where the National Guard fires on anti-war protesters, killing 4 and wounding 11. Then the newspapers are going to publish the My Lai massacre, which is basically when we, the public, learn about approximately 500 South Vietnamese being executed by U.S. troops. These are women, children, elderly, people that at home here in America, in our minds, are definitely not Viet Cong spies or soldiers. So why are we executing them? So that's going to lead to a bunch of shifts into the opinion of the Vietnam War. One thing that Nixon does do is he creates this idea of détente, which is like a cooling between the nuclear nations. So he's going to seek better relations with the Soviets and China. There's going to be a series of treaties that say, hey, let's like limit what we produce for nuclear weapons. Let's limit our hold and resource for nuclear weapons. And he's going to be the first president to travel to China and actually recognizes China as a communist country and opens up communications with them. So the Chinese to this day really love Nixon, and then they really love Clinton because Clinton is going to open up trade relations with China. So Nixon acknowledges them for the first time as a communist country, and then Clinton is going to open up trade. So 2 presidents that China loves and adores to this day. All right, so then becomes the idea of peace with honor, right? So we're still working on that. In 1972, Nixon does order some B-52 bombings against the North Vietnamese at the exact same time that peace talks are continuing. We're eventually going to sign a treaty in 1973. All right, that doesn't really matter because the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese, still invade Saigon. Saigon collapses in April of 1975, and that's really the end to the Vietnam War. So we did have a peace treaty. North Vietnam did take it. Vietnam is a unified country at this point, and it is a communist country. We suffer over 58,000 deaths. We have 300,000 wounded, and the cost was over $150 billion. So some of the weapons that we were using over there, we have napalm and Agent Orange. Both of these later we figured out actually were some causes to cancer for some of our soldiers. So unfortunate side effect. Napalm is a gasoline-based bomb that sets fire to the jungle, and Agent Orange is a leaf-killing toxic chemical, so it would land on the leaves and just incinerate them. So in 1972, Nixon's going to authorize the Christmas bombings, is what they're called. The goal is to force North Vietnam to make concessions during the peace talks, and so we're going to bomb Hanoi and Haiphong. When you look at this, the image of the girl right here, right, they all ran out of a church because the soldiers heard the planes coming and they said, let's get out of here. They're going to start bombing things. They did not know that the bombings were going to be using Agent Orange and napalm. So clothes literally melted off these people. Okay. The girl in that photo, her name is Kim Phuc. Today she does live in Canada and runs a refugee organization for people in war-torn nations. All right, so the silent majority speaks out. Remember how Nixon won? Okay, law and order. So Brown v. Board triggered a large judicial revolution. The Warren court was highly disliked and accused of legislating from the bench. There were calls for his impeachment. Crime increased and people feared losing. This idea of law and order leading to the Miranda v. Arizona decision, which is, right, law and order's infamous, you have the right to remain silent, Miranda rights, okay? a big side effect of the Brown v. Board and different decisions coming down from the court is busing. Okay, so in 1974, we desegregate busing. We try to take people from the inner cities, so the minorities from the inner cities, bus them to the suburb schools, and then vice versa. This is not something people like. Okay, so the South is going to fight it. And then oddly, the North is going to actually become even more segregated than the South, okay, regarding the whole busing, because they refuse to do the busing, okay? So really what results is that in cities like Chicago, Detroit, New York, the city schools stay mostly minority. Okay, suburb schools are white, and it doesn't matter about the Supreme Court decision for busing. They refuse to do it, and nobody enforces that refusal. Here are just some things from the Warren Court. Definitely important. Definitely need to know them. Most of what we know today came from the Warren Court. All right. The Democratic Party, after all this, is really going to be in disarray. We're going to nominate some fascinating people to try to run for office. And, you know, the Republicans definitely have the upper hand during this time. All right. And we win all of those elections. So we being the Republicans, here is Nixon's run for re-election. I mean, wow. All right. So again, get all these things into your notes. All right. Remember the political figures. We had a lot in this one, had a lot of key events to definitely get in there. And so update your big ideas. And until next time.